Now, again, start your Eclipse, and then we'll create a new project for today. And today we'll do loops only. And there's also some exercise at the end to show you. You can take home to complete them. Okay, File, New, Java Projects, CSE114, Spring 16, Week 03, Lab2. Lab2. Okay, so now let's create a new class over there. Let's call that, let's say, simple for loop. And then click on the main method there and finish. Okay. Of course, the best way to also study the behavior of for loops is to use the breakpoints in debugger, as we will see. It's actually much easier to study that when you actually know how to use the debugger and breakpoints in Eclipse. Okay, let's just learn the syntax for the for loop. Okay, first of all, you need a keyword called just for. That's why it's called for loop. And kind of similar to the if statement here, you need a pair of parentheses. And to actually specify the body of the for loop, you also need a brackets pair, like that. And maybe just move your mouse over to the middle of the brackets, hit enter. Okay, so here we can make a comment here. That's the body of the for loop. So we handle that in a moment. Okay. So now, for the for loop here, so this is where the complication comes from. There will be 3 parts you have to specify for a for loop. And since there are 3 parts, we're going to separate each part by a semicolon. So we got 2 semicolons here. Okay, that's why now the code compiles. So before the first semicolon, we're going to specify the first part. In between, we're going to specify a second part and then the third part. Okay, let's do the first part first. So just follow me here. So integer I assigned to 0. So this is a little bit like a assignment. So we are declaring a variable called I and gives its initial value to be 0. Okay, let me just make some comments for you. So typically we call this a loop counter. So we can say we declare a loop counter I. Somehow loop counter I is going to help us keep track of where we are in the loop, as I will show you. So presumably the I value is going to change throughout the loops, as we'll see. Okay, and then let's specify the third part first. Now, third part will be just I plus plus. Can you remind me about what I plus plus means? Keep adding 1, right? So I plus plus is like a shorthand for I equals I plus 1. Okay, good. Okay, that's the third part. So this is to say every time after we repeat the similar action, we're going to update the loop counter value by 1. Okay, we'll see in a moment why we need this. So now the middle part. Okay, so the middle part, let me say first part here. First part, we declare a loop counter I. So the third part, which we just did, update I's value by adding 1 to it. Okay, so now the second part, a Boolean condition for staying in the loop. Okay, it's so-called a state condition. State condition. Okay, let's specify that here. Let me just change this to 1, so it might be easier for you to think, since that's your very first example. Let's say I start from 1, I less than or equal to 10. Let's say this. So what this is trying to say is, we're going to repeat whatever that is specified, which we're going to write in a moment. Whatever that's written in the body of the loop for some number of times. And the way for us to figure out how many times exactly is by seeing how the value of I, the loop counter, is going to change. So I starts with 1, and then each time we're going to increment its value by 1. So we're going to stay in the loop, which means we're going to keep repeating the loop body as long as I is less than root 10. So you can imagine how many times we're going to repeat the loop body. In this case, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's why I asked you this question in the beginning. So this corresponds to the intervals, closed intervals 1 to 10. So you got 10 times exactly. Okay. So let's just do an experiment here. So what about we simply the system that out dot print line, and you can say hello like that. So now we're going to keep printing hello for some number of times, and the number of times we're going to print hello corresponds to how many times i's value is going to last. So it's going to start with 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 until i's value becomes 11, in which case I less than or equal to 10 will give us false, because 11 less than or equal to 10 will be false. Okay? That's kind of the idea. But let's just give it a try, and then we'll use the breakpoints in a moment. Let's just execute this program here, and then you will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you got 10 hellos. Okay. Let's make this program a little bit easier to read, the output. What about hello plus the value of I? So take a guess, what's going to happen here?
One more.
Huh? One more hello? We're still going to print the hello just for 10 times, that's for sure, because we haven't changed the line number 7. Oh, by the way, line number 7 here, it's called the header of the loop. Header of the loop contains, for loop contains 3 parts. Okay, because we haven't changed the way we update I, so it's going to be 10 times, but now each time we're going to give a little bit more information just about what's the current value of I. Okay, let's have a look. If I do that, hello 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 10. Okay, so we're still printing 10 times. Okay, so let me just ask you another question here. Can I just put this into comments? Okay, let's say we still have system.out.println. If I say hello again, okay, just go back to our first version. Let me change this a little bit. Let's say 0. Let me just put this into comments so you can see both versions. How about this? So we start with 0, I less than 10. Okay. Now, the loop counter I is going to start with 0 rather than 1. Okay. And then each time, we're still going to increment i's value by 1. That one hasn't changed. But now we're going to stay in the loop as long as I is less than 10. As soon as I reaches 10, it's going to make the state condition false, which means we're going to go for 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 9. In this case, how many? So it's pretty much like this interval here. We got starting from 0, and then we go to 10, but it's actually open interval. In this case, how many numbers do we have? How many times? 10 times still, right? So now, that is why, let's say we try this, so you should really compare these two. Okay, you can see the way we start with the loop counter is different. One version is 1, the other version is 0. And the way we specify under what circumstances should we stay in the loop. The first version would say I should be less than or equal to 10. The other one is I less than 10. Okay, but the way we update the loop counter is the same. Each time increment by 1. Okay. So now, if you try to print it out, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 hellos. Okay, the same. However, this time, if I again try to use the second version there, let me just put this into comments and put this back. But now this time we're going to see how the value of I is going to change. If I do that, you can see hello 0 to 9. Okay, that's different. So just to recap, in version 1, what we have was the closed interval 1 to 10. In version 2, we have 0 and then to 10 with the open interval on the right. And it happens that you got 10 integers here, also you have 10 integers here. So that's why it's going to repeat the same number of times for the loop body. Okay? Okay. Any questions so far? Good. Okay, let's have a look how this works in Java. So that's the first part, that's the second part, and this is the third part. Sometimes people like to leave the first part empty. You can put it right before the for loop. They mean the same thing, which means you're going to initialize the loop counter for only once. And then you can also leave the third part empty, okay? And put it as the very last line of your loop body, which means every time when you execute your loop body here, at the end, you're going to update i's value by some number, okay? So these two are completely equivalent. Of course, you can simply just put part 1 over here, and also you can put part 3 back, but it's completely up to you, okay? But when you want to run the debugger, it's actually easier to see in this way. So that's why I'm writing this way. Okay, and of course the state condition, you can only put it in the middle part. There's no way around. Okay, and of course you still keep your 2 semicolons there. So just that there's nothing in between before the first semicolon, and there's nothing after the third semicolon. Okay, let's now run the debugger. But I'm going to just change this value a little bit, just to 5, so it's easier to see. Okay. So now let's predict what's going to happen here. So I is going to be initialized as 0. And then, when it is initialized to 0, we go to line number 10. We're going to evaluate the state condition there, I less than 5, which is going to be true. Because 0 less than 5 will be true. That means we're going to enter into the for loop for the very first time. And then we're going to system.out of print line hello plus, and then a 0 value, right? And then we're going to go to the last line in the loop body there and increment from 0 to 1. And then, now here comes the critical part. And then we'll go back to line number 10. Not line number 9, line number 10. So now we're going to check again to see if we should keep executing the loop body for another time. So now, because I has been incremented from 0 to 1, and 1 less than 5 will be true. Okay, so that means we have to execute the loop body again, and at the end, we'll increment from 1 to 2. And then 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and then 4 to 5. Once we increment the value of I from 4 to 5 and go back to the line number 10, 5 less than 5 is equal to false. And then that means we are not going to execute the loop body anymore. We're going to exit from loop. Okay. Let me just put one more line for you, and then we'll do the debugger. System.out. So that's completely outside the loop. We'll say finished with the for loop. Okay, let's put a breakpoint over here. Let's say right before we initialize the loop counter over here. In my case, it's line number 9. Okay, put a breakpoint there. And let's see how that works in Eclipse. If you go for run debug as Java application, and then you will see that we will stop over here. Let me just delete my previous expression there. Sorry. You can remove that by saying remove all. Okay, let's first of all, let's look at the variables. We haven't seen I yet because now we're stopped in the beginning of this. But now if you say step over, you see that we got I being initialized to 0. Okay, so now we are in line number 10. We're going to check the state condition here for the very first time. So now I can go to the expression here, say I less than 5 is going to be true. As long as the state condition here is true, we're going to enter the loop body and execute whatever that's there. So we're going to step over, yes. So we're going to execute this line here. You can see the current value of I is simply 0. Okay, you can even put things like this. You can say hello plus I. Hello 0, right? In the expressions there, you can put whatever valid expression you like. You can just play with that. So now we know we can predict the output is going to be hello 0 on the console. Step over, we do have hello 0 there. And then we're going to now increment the value for I. So now if you go back to variables, currently I is simply 0. So we're going to execute that line, and now it becomes 1. Okay? So now we go back. So now we go from here back to here to check the state condition for the second time. Okay, remember the first time we check it was after we initialized the loop counter. Now for the second time, it's actually after the first time we repeated the loop body. So now we have I being equal to 1, and of course 1 less than 5 will give us true. So now we're going into the loop for the second time. Okay, and now we're going to print out hello 1 without any surprise. And now we're going to increment the value of I by another 1. So you can see now it's still 1. When we say step over, you'll go to 2. So far so good? Okay, so now I will just go ahead, and you can see now it's 3, it's now 4. That's still okay, we're still going to execute it. But now it's 5. You can see now in the expression there, I less than 5 will now be false, because 5 less than 5 is false. So now that means we're not going to enter the loop body anymore. So we are going to exit from there and go to the line that's directly after the for loop. Okay, that's why we'd say we finished with the for loop. And then you can stop from there. Any questions up to now? Any questions? Yes. Maybe I'll help you with that during the exercise. Yeah, perfect. Just any question about what I just demonstrated? If you're having a problem with the computer, I can help you during the break. Yeah, that's what I would do. Conceptually, is there any confusion here, just about the loop? No? Okay, so now let's do something slightly different, slightly more complicated. So now you can see that by adjusting the initialization, let me just put some comments for you. So this is version 2. Version 2, we have the loop counter in the range. So it's basically from 0 to 5. Okay? And in version 1, we have the loop counter in the range. In this case, it will be from 1 to 10 inclusively on both sides. Okay, I better change this back to 10 so that will be easier to compare. Okay, you can see now, although the starting value for both versions are different, and also the upper bound are also different, but it turns out they're going to run the same number of times for iteration. Okay, that's something for you to study before tomorrow. Not for the quiz, but for the lecture, since I'm going to talk about for loop tomorrow. Okay, let's now go for a slightly more complicated exercise here. Okay, one thing, let me just, let's create a new class first, and then I'll tell you what the exercise is. Let's say simple for loop 2. And then main method there. Okay, so let's go to main for loop 2. Okay. So let's say this is the exercise I would like you to complete. Let's see what the expected output is. Okay. Let's say this is the console. You're first of all going to prompt the user for an integer value. So you can say, how many times would you like to, it can be a single line, you don't have to split a line like that. Would you like to print hello? Okay, and then the user, let's say they enter 3. In this case, you're going to print hello, hello, and hello. So that's the exercise for you. So one thing for you. So if you go back to the simple for loop we just did, you can see over there we gave a very concrete value, very specific value of 10. But now the value is not going to be from your side. It's going to be read from the user. So somehow you have to store this value here into some kind of independent variable. And then you use the value of that variable as the upper bound for your loop. Okay, that's hint for you. Okay, try this, and then I'll take a few minutes, and then we'll continue from there. I'll go over a solution together. Okay. Actually, you seem to have some errors. You can just proceed. Okay, so now you can see your stuff. Okay, so you were asking what's the difference between. So when you say run, if you say run as Java application, it's going to run it without stopping at the breakpoints. But if you say debug as, debug means you're trying to find errors. So if you say debug as, it is going to stop at every breakpoint you just set. Yeah. Right. Oh, I see. So if you simply just go debug, it is not going to somehow execute the code. It simply just switch the view. It doesn't really launch your program. You have to explicitly launch the program. Yeah, that's the issue. Yeah. So let's say if you only switch the view, let's say you did, you can still run it. You can still say run debug as Java application. You can still do it, but you just got to do it explicitly. If you do that, you still have that. Okay. Yeah. Well, you have to, whenever you want to stop and terminate here, and then you switch back to Java. That's where you have it. Okay, let's go over the solution quickly. That shouldn't be too difficult, I hope. Okay. Of course, we need a scanner here. And, okay, one question. Any one of you who has no clue how to complete this? Should have some clue, right? Like how to do it? Very good. Let's go over that. Okay, first of all, we need a scanner. And then input, new, scanner, system.in. Okay, let's prompt the user. Let me not put any comments here. System.out.println. How many times would you like to print hello? Okay, so now we're going to read an integer from the user. You can call that I, you can call that how many times. Let me say how many times, following the Java convention for variables, right? How many times equals input dot next int. So now, help me out. I have a for loop. What should be the each part? Help me out. What should be the first part? Okay, let's follow Lily's version here. So let's say we're going to start with 1. Okay, everything else is going to be corresponding to the initial value being 1. Okay, what happens afterwards? How many times? Good. Very good. Very good. And then we can say system.out.println. So the only thing we are learning now is here doesn't have to be a specific value, 10 or 20. It can be any variable of integer. Cannot be a double, by the way. Has to be integer. Okay, so now you can say hello. Okay, let's try this, make sure this works, and then I'll give you different versions. Okay, I'm going to play with not just the range, but also the way we update the loop counter to just give you more ideas how for loop works. If we try this, what about just 0? Nothing printed out. That's good. But actually, I'm going to go through with you why 0 will actually have such input. We'll go through the breakpoints in a moment. If I say 1, hello, that's good. If I say 2, hello, one more. If I say 3, try one more. What happens if I say -1? -1 is also an integer. Is it going to print anything? Nothing. Okay, let's see why. Okay, let me put a breakpoint over here. Right before we read the input from the user, let's put a breakpoint here. Excuse me. So when we say run debug as Java application, okay, so now we have got a prompt message here. So let's say 0 for now. If we say 0, enter, and then we step over. So now you can see that in the variables panel here, how many times has been set to 0. Okay? As I said before, the first part is going to initialize i's value to be 1. And then we're going to stay in the loop as long as this Boolean condition is true. But now, do you think it's going to be true? So I will be initialized to be 1. And then how many times, as we know, has been entered as 0. So we got 1 less than 0, less than or equal to 0. So that should be false. Agree? So that is why this condition here was checked for the very first time as false. So we will not even enter the body of the loop for even just one time. That is why if you try to say step over, it's going to skip it. Okay? Similarly, let's say over here if you enter -2, for example, and then you're going to check that 1, the initial value is always the same, 1 less than or equal to -2, which is also false, which means you're not going to enter into the loop for the very first time. Okay, that's why you didn't have anything printed out, which is correct. Okay, good. So now let me give you different versions. Okay, let me just put it into comments. Okay, we're gonna try different versions now. First of all, this one just a test. What about this? Do you think this is gonna work? Any idea? Of course, you wouldn't rewrite something like that yourself. I'm trying to demonstrate a point. You can actually change the way in whatever way you like. The way to figure this out is to think about what's the corresponding range or interval for this loop counter here. So we start with 3, which is inclusive, and then we are going to go up to and including how many times? +3. So how many times +3? And because it's less than or equal to, so that should be inclusive over here as well. According to our formula, it's going to be this minus that +1. So which means it's going to be how many times +1. So it doesn't seem like it will work. Let's verify that and then let's see how to fix it. If we try this, let's say 2, it prints 3 times, right? That's exactly why what the math tells you, because the loop counter has has how many times +1 possible values there. So that's why when you enter 2, it's going to print 3 times, and when you enter 4, it's going to print 5 times. Okay, kind of follow here? Okay, good. So now, how should we fix it? You can either say, let's say if I do this, so that means I have changed this from closed interval here into an open interval. In this case, how many values are there? You got how many times plus 3 minus 3, which will be exactly how many times, right? You can kind of see what I'm doing here. Okay, let's try again to verify. Let's say 3. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, working. One more. I'll show you one more. This one's complicated, okay? But stare at that for a moment. somehow, what's kind of the interval we have now? So we start with how many times, and we're going to go downwards rather than upwards with I, right? So what's sort of the corresponding interval here? It's kind of like we start, well, if you simply write this, how many times, and then 0, since 0 should not be included. This one doesn't make sense because you should always start with the smaller number and then the larger number. So you can kind of flip it. So it's really like this. 0 to how many times. That's really the number you have. Okay? I put the comments for you and then we'll verify that. So this, okay, the range I'll put it here. It's really like you have 0 and then how many times. Okay, let's first of all let's check that. 3 hellos. Okay, one more. If I have 5 hellos. So this one seems to work. First of all, let's think about why it works. So now let's say how many times happens to be. Let me just run the debugger and then we'll see. So can we? So we still put the breakpoint here. So that's still there. Run debug as Java application. Okay. So now let's say we read 3, just 3. Okay. And then we'll step over here. So now you can see how many times would be 3. Think about this. We're going to initialize i's value to be 3 here, and then 3 larger than 0 is true. That means we're going to enter the loop, okay, according to the state condition here. So we're going to go there, okay, and let's pay attention to what i's value is going to change. So currently it's simply 3, okay, and now if you do that, it's first of all going to decrement the value of I to be 2, and then 2 larger than 0 will still be true. That means we're going to enter the loop again. Okay, that's kind of the idea. And then if you go on, and then it's going to decrement from 2 to 1, and then enter again because 1 will be larger than 0. Okay, finally, it's going to decrement the value from 1 to 0, and now 0 larger than 0 will be false. So that means we're going to exit from the loop. Okay, so this is kind of like a trickier example I want to show you. And my point is, there is no fixed way for you to specify the loop counter initial value, or how you specify the state condition, or how you update the loop counter. You have full flexibility. But the one I show you in the very first few versions I show you, or the version I'm going to show in the slides tomorrow, they are the standard ways of doing things. Of course, if I give you something like this in the test or in the exam, you should really know how to figure them out, if they are right or not. And the way to figure them out, which I will say again tomorrow, is by thinking about what's the corresponding ranges of that loop counter. Okay, that's the best way to figure that out. Okay, let me stop this. If you have no question, I will go on to the while loop. Okay. No questions? Okay. Yeah, we have time. We have time. Let's do the while loop, and then I'll give you some exercise. Okay. So let's do simple while loop with a main. Here. Okay, so now we're going to write something using a slightly different syntax, but we're going to achieve something very similar, okay, in the simple case. So let's say we still have a loop counter I initialized to be 0, and now we're going to use a while keyword. So now we are introducing you to the other kind of loop, which is called a while loop. And fortunately, while loop requires only one part to be specified. There's no semicolon here. For the for loop, you got 3 parts, but for while loop, only 1 part. And then also for the body of the while loop, you also have your body of the while loop. Okay, so here is going to be also the condition under which we should keep going with the while loop body. Okay, similar idea. So now we can say while I larger than or equal to, less than or equal to 10, for example. Let's say. So let's say initialize to be 1. And let's say system.out.println. Let's just print hello. Okay. Let's say this part here is, you can say system.out.println output from while loop. Okay. For comparison, let's put some for loop here side by side to show you that these two loops are completely the same. Okay. They're completely equivalent on their behavior. Okay. So first of all, system.out.println, you can say output from for loop. Okay, let's write a for loop we are more familiar with. So you can say for integer I equals 1, I less than or equal to 10, I plus plus. And then here you can simply say, let me just copy that. Like that. So the output will be completely the same. Let's execute this to see what happens. If you do that, you can see, oh, sorry. I'm pretty sure I made a very common mistake. Let me, okay, very good. Let me see. Yes, yes, okay. You know what? Maybe this can be a question for you. First of all, I can tell you that, actually stare at these two sides, okay? There is something wrong for one of the loops. Tell me which. Something wrong there. Somehow the program never stops. It is supposed to stop after printing 10 times hello for each of the loops. But somehow, as you can see from my previous output, it never stops. There's something wrong with one of the loops. While loop? Why? You're just guessing. Okay, that's okay. I can tell you, yeah, there's something wrong with the while loop. It is?
Because I in the while loop continues to be 1 and you don't increment it up.
And what's the consequence of that?
It's forever stuck in the while loop.
More to that. Why would you think it would get stuck?
Because if I never becomes greater than 10, it continue to repeat it.
Very good. Fantastic. Yes. So the problem, exactly. The problem is, you can see in the for loop, we do have I++ in the third part. But in the while loop, you can see that the I value was initialized to be 1. And then we will stay in the loop as long as I is less than or equal to 10. But you can see in the loop body there, we never change the value of I. Never ever. We have to explicitly do that. So that means I's value is going to stay in 1. And 1 less than or equal to 10 is always going to be true. So we will never exit from the loop. Okay? That's why you should do I plus plus here. That's a very, very common mistake. Very, very common. Should I say that was intentional? I did a mistake? No, actually, I didn't. That wasn't intentional. I just made a mistake. Very common. Okay. Okay. So, yeah. So actually, that's something to actually notice. So now you can see why we do need to somehow update the value of the loop counter, because somehow you want to see, well, the state condition here maybe you'll be true for some number of times, but eventually it must be false. Otherwise, you'll just keep going. And even worse, let me just take this while loop as an example for you. Just go a little bit further. Let's say this. Let's say if I happen to just want to print out the value of I. System.out.println. If I only say print out the value of I, let's say again, I forgot to increment the value of I. Don't try this. Okay, I'm going to show you on my computer. Okay, if you simply try that, you're going to see the following. It's always 1. Okay, never stop. I would say in this case, you're lucky, because from the output, you can see the same output is just being produced to the console. Let's say somehow your body here doesn't do any output to the console. Somehow, maybe you just do some simple assignments. Maybe you say integer, let's say, for example, let's say double area equals 3.14 times 10 times 10, something like that. You don't have any output to the console, just some computation. So now, if you try to execute your program here, nothing. You can see nothing to the console, well, except for the first line. After that, it seems like the program is finished. It seems like, but you can see the button here, the stop button here is still enabled, which means your program is still running. If somehow you forgot, you simply put this Eclipse aside and do something else on your computer. Gradually, eventually your computer is going to slow down dramatically, because now Eclipse is not really eating up the resources in your computer, because it keep going. You see, it's really keep going. The hidden process is really just keep running the loop. You see, yeah. You can do it in experiments in your computer. So try that, and then maybe in about a few minutes, you'll hear the fan of your computer start to become very loud. So that's when the resources are being being occupied by the loop. Anyway, my point is, be careful with this. Okay, let me get rid of that, and then I'll put this back. Okay, and of course I'll put this increment back. Okay, another question for you. I'll also put the for loop back. Right here. Okay, another question for you. If I have okay. Okay, I think 20 should be fine. Let me double check. Okay, that's good. Okay, let me just check that. We also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So it seems like I definitely need 18 here. Okay, so that's kind of tricky. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so now somehow this program here, this for loop here, where I starts with 1, I is incremented by 1 each time. Eventually, I will reach 10. Okay, and we're going to print out hello 10 times. But now, if you consider this while loop here, okay, And this is actually going to give you exactly the same output, which means it's also going to print out hello 10 times. Can you imagine why? This is going to print out hello for 10 times as well. Anyone want to try? Why 10 times? Think about how the value of I is going to change. So I is going to start with 0. And then, think about this. Do a table. So we have I. And then the state condition would be I less than or equal to 18. Okay. The initial value for I would be just 0. And this will give you true, right? If you have, so now it's going to be incremented by 2. So it will be incremented to 2, and 2 less than or equal to 18 is going to give you true again. So you're going to have 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, and up to 18. So they will all give you true, okay, all the way. Until you actually get to 20, it's going to give you false, right? So you're actually going to print hello when I is equal to 0, I is equal to 2, etc. How many values do you have? You have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have 10 values of I where you're going to print out the hello. Okay, that's how you figure it out. Okay. I know this one's tricky since you haven't seen many examples of the while loop yet, but I just want to challenge you. Okay. Okay, so now that's about a simple while loop, and now we're going to do something interesting. Now let's go to another class, new class, simple while loop 2, and click on the main method here and say finish. Okay, so now let's say we would like to do the following program. Let's see how we can do it. And then I'll have some exercise for you. Let's say we simply just want to interact with the user in the following way. Let's say we'll say enter a positive integer, and then the user might enter maybe 4. Okay, and then your program is going to repeatedly ask the user to enter a positive integer. So because 4 is positive, so we're going to ask the user to enter again. Enter a positive integer. Let's say they just enter another one. Let's say they say 6, which is also positive, and we'll keep going until they actually enter something that's negative. Enter a positive integer. And then it might say, for example, -1. In this case, that's not positive anymore. So you're going to say, going to terminate and say bye-bye. Then we are done. That's kind of the interaction we're hoping for. So you will keep interacting with the user only if they keep entering positive numbers. As soon as they enter something that's negative, that means they want to quit. Okay? It's a very simple program to write using the while loop. As we'll see. I'll show you. I'll walk you through. The idea is we somehow have to specify this kind of condition here to say we'll stay in the loop only when the user input is a positive number. When it gets to not positive, then we have to quit. Okay, let me show you how you can do it. So we definitely need a scanner here. Scanner input equals new scanner system.in. Okay, so now we can say the following. System.out.println. For the very first time, enter an integer So integer, let's say user input is equal to, let's say, input dot next int. Okay. So now we're going to say while the user input, which we just read, is actually a positive number, then we're going to stay in the loop. Otherwise, we're going to exit. Okay. So now, as long as the user actually enters something that's positive, that means we have to continue to interact with them. And the way to do that is to have something like this. Okay, so we're just going to do the following. Okay, I know we do have some repetition here, but I'll show you in a moment how to simplify that. I think this might be easier to understand. So in line number 7 and 8, we prompt the user for the very first time for some integer. And we're going to enter the for loop, we're going to enter the while loop if the very first input is actually positive. Okay, after that, we're going to keep prompting them for integer. And you can see the user input here will be updated each time we prompt them for a new integer. And then we're going to go back to the while loop, to the beginning of the while loop, and check to see if the latest input we just read is actually positive. If it is, then this condition here will be true. Otherwise, it will be false, which means you are done. Okay. So now let's, when we are done, we'll say bye. So after the while loop, we'll say system.out.println. Okay, so we'll say bye. Like that. A simple program, actually. So that's version 1. I'll show you another version in a moment. Okay, let's try this. Enter an integer, 10, positive, 20. So you keep going, 30. Okay, 9. Okay, now if I say something that is not strictly positive, if I say -2, for example, it's going to say bye. Okay. Do you follow this program here? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's just stick to this version for now. Okay. So let's say I want you to extend this program a little bit, to say now when the user actually enter a positive number, you have to print out that many times of hello. So for example here, for the first time, if the user says 4, before you ask for another positive number, you have to say hello, 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 and hello. Apparently you need a for loop for that. Where should you put it? Somehow the for loop has to be repeated, right? Each time when you got a positive integer, you have to use a for loop to do it. So now somehow the for loop should really occur within this while loop over here. That's completely possible. So remember we talk about, when we talk about selections, we say the if statement is actually compound statements. Because in each branch, you can simply just have as complicated code as you like. And for loop is also just another compound statements. So in the body of the for loop, you can have as many lines of code as you like, including if statements, including while loop, including for loop. We'll see many examples later. Okay? But for this one, I would like you to put something here. In the beginning of the for loop here, so put a for loop here. Okay, I want you to complete that. And then let's see how the program works. Okay, that one should be rather easy, right? So if you do for loop, integer I equals 1, I less than or equal to user input, which is guaranteed to be larger than 0 because this here, if that passed, we enter the loop. And I plus plus. System.out.println. And we can simply say hello. Okay, that's about the for loop that you're familiar with. Now you can see the for loop is simply part of the while loop, which means we're going to repeat printing hellos using the for loop as long as the user has entered a positive number. Okay, and let's try that. If you say 1, hello, 2 hellos, shouldn't hit the enter. Do it again. If you say 5 hellos, 2 hellos. Now if I say -1, that means I want to quit. You will say bye. Okay? That's kind of how you do it. Okay? So we still have time. So now let me just show you a different version of this program here, and then I'll give you the exercise, and then we're done. I think that'll be enough for today. So now let me show you another version here. I will explain that. It's going to be, okay. The second version is mainly to get rid of the repetition we have. You can see we are we are repeating these two lines here, and also these two lines here. So we're actually repeating these two lines twice. We would like to get rid of them. Let's see how we can do that. Excuse me. I'm going to cough one more time. Okay. Let me show you another version. Okay, the version here. Let's put a new class. Simple while loop 3. Forgot about the main method here. So you can put main and then the main method here. Good. Let me just copy that code there and then make an improvement. Okay. Okay, so the idea is we're going to have these two lines appear only once in your code, only once. And the way to do that is by using a Boolean variable here. Let me show you. User has entered. Let me just have maybe a little bit shorter name, otherwise it's too long. What about user input is valid? Okay, how about that? I'll put some comments for you. Of course. Okay, user input is valid means the user has entered positive number. Okay? And now, let me just finish the program first and then I'll explain. Okay, and then here the state condition here is user input is valid over here. And then, like that. Get rid of that. Okay, let me think about that. Okay. If the user input is valid, then we are going to enter the loop for the first time. and then we'll prompt that for the user. And then we're going to say user input is valid is equal to user input greater than 0. Okay, so bear with me. So now user input let's say just 0 for now. It's not final yet. I'm just playing with the code, and now I'll say when it's final. Okay, let me give it a try, and then I'll say it. Okay, and then let's say 1. Hello, -1. Okay, seems to work. Okay, let me explain. First of all, this code is slightly simpler in the sense that we are only doing these 2 lines once. First of all, okay, only once. So, of course, your take-home exercise for today is to compare these 2 versions and think about how they behave. Okay, but they happen to behave exactly the same. Okay, so then you have these 2 lines over here only once. So now we have just introduced a Boolean variable here to see if the user input so far is valid or not. Okay, and we are using that Boolean variable as the state condition here because it can be any Boolean expression as the state condition, anything that's either true or false. You can see that initially we'd say the user hasn't input anything wrong, so we'd say that's simply true. Okay, so this is true. So we are going to pass this state condition here for the very first time. So that's guaranteed. We're going to enter the while loop for the first time. Okay, and we're going to update that Boolean variable later on when we read a new value from the user. So you can see whenever we read a user input from the user integer value there, we're going to check to see if the user input is actually positive. If it is, we're going to set true to here. Otherwise, we're going to set false to here. Okay, and as soon as this becomes false, we're going to exit from the loop. Okay, and also this user input here is actually whatever value they enter. It can be anything. It can be any positive number. We only say that initially it's simply just 0. Okay, and we are going to print out the list of hellos to the console. But since we haven't let me just write the debugger for you. That might be easier. Okay, let's see the debugger. Can we just put a breakpoint here? Okay, this one, although it's simpler, but it requires some thinking there. That's why I'm putting that side by side so you can compare. So let's say run debug as Java application over here. So now we are now here. So if you look at the variables here, we haven't got user input is valid yet, since we haven't declared that. If you say step over, so user input is valid is now set to true. Okay, and then we're also going to set the user input to be just 0. So now user input is valid at the moment is simply just true. So that is why this while loop is going to be continued. Okay, so now we're going to go into the beginning of the for loop. So now, remember we set the initial value for user input to be 0. Okay, and here you can see the loop counter I here is set to be 1 to begin with. So you have 1 less than or equal to 0, which is false. So which means we wouldn't put anything yet to the console. Okay, so we're going to bypass this loop here. So now we're going to now prompt the user for their very first integer. Okay, so now let's say if they say 3 over here, enter and step over. So now if you go back to variables here, the user input has been set to 3, and then user input is valid, which is a Boolean variable. We're going to set it to whatever value of this expression is. So user input larger than 0 will be true, because 3 is larger than 0. If you just step over, you will see that user input valid remains to be true. So you go back to the while loop, and then we will pass the state condition. So now this time, user input is 3. So that means we're going to print out 3 times of hello to the console. Okay? So now that's why you will see that if you just try to execute that, it's going to print out 3 hellos to the console, as you can see. And now we're going to prompt the user the second time for their input input integer. So now let's say this time we say -1. Okay, hit enter and step over. So now user input has been set to -1. So now -1 larger than 0 is going to give us false. So if you do that, user input valid will become false. Okay, so now the while loop here is going to have a false state condition, which means we're going to bypass and then go directly outside the while loop, which is going to print out by. Okay, that's how that works. Any questions about this second program here? Okay, I'm actually going to talk about this pattern more, maybe on Friday, and you actually need this kind of pattern to do your assignments. So I would suggest there will be 2 take-home exercises for today. The first one is compare version 1 and version 2 of this program here, and try to understand why they behave the same. Okay, that's the first exercise. And the second exercise, I'll give that to you now. Let me just stop the recording.